Tell me, how'd a loser like him get a girl as fine as you probably were?
Blood pounds in Dan's ears as the stranger's drink drips down his face. Cold and humiliating. His wife Jessica stands beside him, frozen. The young guy with the phone smirks, his screen still glowing with the photo he just posted online. "What's wrong, old man?" The stranger leans closer, his breath reeking of cheap beer. "Your wife gonna watch you do nothing? What a loser." Dan's fists clench. Something ancient and violent stirs inside him, something he buried 18 years ago. His muscles remember exactly how to break this man's jaw in 3 precise movements, how to collapse his windpipe before he even realizes he's dying. Have you ever wanted to hurt someone so badly that your hands shake? Jessica touches his arm. "Dan, let's just go. You don't stand a chance." The stranger laughs louder. His friends join in, their phones out, recording everything. We will get back to this later because what she doesn't know is that Dan could have done worse, much worse. Subscribe to the channel now. What happens next will shock you. Seriously, guys, subscribe. Rewind to earlier that same day. Dan walks through the Buffalo car dealership with a smile that sells dreams. He understands what people want before they even know it themselves. That's why his face hangs on the wall again this month as Salesman of the Month. 4th time this year. His colleague Hal bursts through the entrance, tires screeching like he's auditioning for an action movie. Hal believes cars are like women. They want speed. The rest of the staff thinks he's ridiculous. Dan leaves early because today matters more than any sale. It is his wedding anniversary. 18 years with Jessica. Their neighborhood looks like something from a painting, perfect lawns, quiet streets. But wait, the hints given in the next few seconds will be needed later in the video to solve a mystery most people can't solve. So watch closely because if you don't see it, then you'll miss it. They have 3 kids waiting inside, Nenah, Kyle, and Max. But perfect is just another word for fragile. Nenah plans to follow her boyfriend Trevor to Iowa. She wants to change her major, abandoning the journalism career she worked years to build, but her parents strongly disapprove of it and would never let such happen. Kyle barely speaks to his father anymore. When Dan asks where he's going, Kyle mumbles something about visiting his friend Samir. Dan reminds him that he made Kyle quit gaming to make real friends, not to waste his life blowing people's heads off 24/7. Kyle fires back that Dan wanted him to have friends, so now he's seeing one. Would you let your teenager throw your own words back at you? Dan mentions that Kyle was supposed to babysit Max tonight for their anniversary. Nenah and Kyle immediately start arguing about who has to watch their little brother. Dan steps in, assigning Nenah the duty and suggesting Kyle could use some time at Samir's place anyway. With no other choice, Nenah agrees, but she suspects Kyle's real intentions. She knows exactly what Kyle's really doing. Kyle arrives at Samir's house and hands over $200 as rent payment. Not for a room, but for a gaming setup hidden in the garage. His family has no idea that Kyle is Killboy, a streaming sensation with thousands of fans who watch him dominate shooter games with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Dan and Jessica arrive at the carnival, their anniversary tradition. Same place, same rides, same routine for 18 years. While waiting for their turn to ride the roller coaster, some young guys in line ahead of them are glued to their phones, watching Killboy's stream. They're so captivated they wave Dan and Jessica ahead without even looking up. One of them mutters that Killboy is awesome. Dan enjoys this predictability. Jessica doesn't. She tells Dan he's such a creature of habit. She loves that about him, but her voice carries an edge. She mentions they even have sex on Thursdays, always Thursdays, like it's scheduled in a planner. The roller coaster climbs. Their stomachs drop. For 90 seconds, Jessica feels alive. Dan promises to make things less boring, less routine. They kiss near the exit. The moment feels genuine, almost perfect. Then a camera flash cuts through it. Dan turns and sees a young man holding up his phone, grinning. He asks the guy to delete the photo. The stranger mocks him instead, already posting it online with a caption calling Dan a loser. Jessica urges Dan to ignore it, to just walk away. The stranger isn't finished. He pours his drink over Dan's head, the liquid running down his neck and soaking his shirt. He looks at Jessica and asks if she enjoys being with such a wimp. Dan's vision tunnels. Red creeps in at the edges. Every instinct screams at him to move, to strike, to end this. But he walks away. You think you know what kind of man Dan is? You're wrong. Wait till you see. On the drive home, Jessica assures Dan she didn't want him to fight. She knows he hates violence. But in her silence, disappointment hangs heavy like smoke. At home, Dan thinks about the incident while changing Max's diaper. He climbs into bed and finds Jessica already asleep. He wakes her and both share a couple moments as Jessica remembers their anniversary sex. He whispers about kicking that guy's ass. Jessica stirs and laughs, saying he totally could have. She apologizes for laughing, seeing his hurt, but the damage is done. The next day, Jessica pounds a heavy bag at her kickboxing class. She vents her concerns to another woman there, named Gwen, about her teenage daughter. Gwen mentions she's visiting Buffalo to see her ex. Jessica accidentally punches Gwen square in the face during a drill. They bond over smoothies afterward, the way violence sometimes creates unexpected friendships. Jessica opens up about feeling trapped. She tells Gwen that Dan is content just being in Buffalo, never wanting more, never craving adventure. She used to dream about traveling the world, seeing places that existed beyond their suburban prison. Gwen reveals she's a travel agent. She has to catch a flight but leaves her business card behind. Jessica stares at it like it's a lottery ticket. Later, Dan shops with Max strapped to his chest. He notices a man watching him from across the store. The man's eyes don't blink enough. Luckily, he reacts swiftly when the man lunges at him. He pleads to at least put his baby down first so he can kick his ass. The attacker doesn't care. Even with Max against his chest, Dan moves like water. His hands find pressure points. His elbow connects with the man's temple. 3 seconds later, the attacker crumples to the floor, unconscious. Did you catch that? The first crack in Dan's mask. Dan drives home, his hands steady on the wheel despite what just happened. Neighbors watch him pull into the driveway, sensing something different, something dangerous. Inside, Dan opens a hidden compartment in their bedroom closet. Guns, stacks of cash, passports with different names and his face. His hands shake as he pulls out a burner phone and dials a number he swore he'd never use again. A man named Augie answers. Dan tells him he needs new identities for his entire family. All of them. They're in danger. He tells Dan that his old boss, McCaffrey, has been hunting him across the globe for years. That photo from the carnival. Someone saw it. Someone recognized him. Dan offers $500,000 for the new IDs. He tells Augie to meet him in Las Vegas in 3 days. Augie asks, why Vegas? Dan explains he can't tell his wife they're taking a vacation to Tempe, Arizona. But Vegas? Vegas he can sell. Augie asks if Dan hasn't told his family the truth yet. He calls Dan mental. Subscribe to the channel before his secrets destroy everything. Augie warns him that running from McCaffrey's mercenaries with a family who has no clue what's happening is nearly impossible. He needs to tell them now. Dan hangs up and starts packing bags. Nothing about this is planned. His perfect suburban life is about to shatter, and his family has no idea what's coming. Dan storms into Nenah's school like a man being chased by ghosts. He interrupts an editorial meeting asking for his daughter. A student tells him Nenah hasn't been editor for 3 months. She probably quit because of her boyfriend's influence. Dan pulls out $50, asking where she is. The girl looks at the money and says she's a journalist. She doesn't give people up. Dan adds another $50. The editor immediately forgets she is one and points toward the bleachers, under them specifically. Beneath the metal structure, Dan finds Nenah. One of Nenah's friends sees Dan approach and whispers that Nenah's dad is hot. Nenah groans, telling her friend Kelly that's disgusting. Dan stares at his daughter in disappointment. He asks how she could abandon the editor position after working so hard for it. Nenah snaps back, asking if he even reads her work. Dan insists he does. Her expression says she doesn't believe him, but there's no time for this conversation. Dan tells her they need to pick up Kyle from the chess club immediately. At the school, Dan asks about Kyle. The coach informs him that Kyle quit chess club 2 months ago. Another lie. Another crack in the foundation Dan thought he knew. How well do you really know your own family? They drive to Samir's house. Dan walks into the garage and finds Kyle streaming to thousands of viewers, headphones on, fingers dancing across keyboard and mouse with the precision of a surgeon. Kyle's screen name flashes in bright letters. Killboy. Dan's is so disappointed with his discovery. On the way back, he tells them they're going to Las Vegas. Right now. Today. The kids start to protest. Dan cuts them off. He instructs them to act nothing but thrilled about this trip when they see their mother. If they don't, he'll tell Jessica about all the lying they've been doing. The journalism, the chess club, the streaming. The kids go quiet. At Jessica's hospital workplace, Dan finds her between shifts. He tells her they're taking that spontaneous trip she's been craving. Vegas. Tonight. Jessica blinks, confused. She asks who he is because she doesn't even recognize this version of her husband. Dan grins and tells her she's going to love this new him. He's crazy in bed. Jessica raises an eyebrow, reminding him it's not Tuesday. She's impressed despite herself. This unpredictability, this wildness, it's what she's been starving for. She agrees. As they walk toward the parking lot, Dan spots a black SUV idling near the exit. His entire body goes rigid. He tells Jessica they need to leave immediately. She asks what's wrong. Dan doesn't answer, just walks faster. They reach their car. Dan's eyes scan every shadow, every corner. The moment they pull out of the parking lot, the black SUV follows. In it are McCaffrey's men. Dan merges into traffic. The SUV stays 3 cars back. He takes a sudden right turn. The SUV follows. Jessica asks what he's doing. Dan tells her a squirrel jumped out, that's all. His hands grip the wheel like he's trying to strangle it. He weaves between lanes. cutting off a bus. The bus passes between them and the SUV, giving Dan precious seconds. Dan accelerates, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. He spots the tracking device's faint blinking light reflecting off the chrome near the wheel well. They've been marked. Realizing this, he swerves into his workplace parking lot and barely gets the gate closed before the SUV reaches them. While trying to hide the car, Dan drives the car onto a lift with his entire family still inside. Jessica, confused, asks if they really need to be in the car while he does this, but Dan tells them he needs to check the oil and coolant quickly, just a precaution before the long drive. Under the car, his fingers find the tracker, a small magnetic disc. The black SUV rolls past outside the fence, the occupants scanning the lot. Dan spots his colleague Hal about to test drive a brand new car. Dan calls out to him, telling him to take it on the freeway and really open her up. If he gets a ticket, Dan will pay for it. Hal grins and speeds off. Dan slaps the tracker onto Hal's bumper as he passes. The SUV takes the bait, following Hal onto the highway. Dan's family has 33 hours to reach Las Vegas, but first, he needs to make them invisible. He collects everyone's phones, declaring this a device-free family trip. The kids groan and complain. Jessica looks confused but intrigued. Dan tosses all the phones into...
No way you just did that.
Oh my God, Dad!
I just freed
Nenah yells, asking if he really just threw away their phones. Dan tells them he's freeing the family from the shackles of technology. Jessica says his dad has lost his mind. His family are all on him. It is basically family versus dad. He hasn't lost it. He's trying to save their lives. At a travel agency, the clerk laughs when Dan says they don't have phones. The man pulls out dusty paper maps from a drawer, the kind nobody uses anymore. The clerk asks for a credit card. Dan drops a thick stack of cash on the counter instead, asking for a room at a Las Vegas hotel. The clerk's smile fades. He takes the money without another word. On the highway, the family starts singing together for the first time in years. Vanilla Ice's Ice Ice Baby blasts through the speakers. Max giggles in his car seat. Kyle finally cracks a smile. Even Nenah joins in, her earlier anger melting. For one perfect moment, they're not running. They're just a family. But McCaffrey is closer than they think. At Dan's house, McCaffrey walks through the rooms like a predator inspecting territory. His tech specialist scrolls through online footage and discovers Kyle's streaming identity. Killboy, thousands of followers, hundreds of videos. McCaffrey's thin smile spreads across his face. He orders every available operative to locate and intercept the family van. One of his men asks what makes McCaffrey think Dan's family doesn't know the truth. After all, they're still with him. McCaffrey's eyes narrow. He says that's exactly what makes this interesting. On a rest stop, Nenah criticizes Kyle's gaming career, echoing everything her boyfriend Trevor says about it being a waste of time. Kyle fires back, asking if Nenah even remembers what her own personality is like anymore. He tells her he misses the old Nenah, the one who was actually cool before Trevor infected her brain. A girl approaches Kyle, recognizing him from his streams. She asks for a photo, calling him Killboy. Kyle's face lights up. For the first time around his family, someone sees him as more than just the quiet kid who games too much. In a rest stop bathroom, Dan practices his confession to the mirror. He tries different approaches, different words. He tells his reflection that before he met Jessica, he was a covert assassin. The words sound insane out loud. He tries again. He explains that he escaped that life, that he thought it was buried forever. None of it sounds right. Outside, he sees Kyle taking a photo with the fan. The girl mentions she's posting it online immediately, tagging Killboy's location. Upon learning that his son is a popular game streamer, and the girl is about to upload the pictures, Dan's blood goes cold. He tells his family all the rooms at the hotel are booked. They have to keep driving through the night. Jessica asks why the sudden change. Dan says it's just better this way, more adventure. McCaffrey now knows exactly where they're going. 3 motorcycles roar onto the highway behind them, their engines growling like mechanical wolves. Dan checks the mirror and sees them. Jessica and the kids are already asleep, under the influence of the calming music in the vehicle. Only Dan stays awake. Only Dan sees the bikers closing in. He reaches under his seat and pulls out a silenced pistol, keeping it low and trying hard not to wake any of his family. One biker shoots his mirror, pulls alongside the van. Dan swerves suddenly, clipping the bike's front wheel. The rider goes down in a spray of sparks and screaming metal. Max wakes up, his eyes wide but not scared. He watches his father like this is the most exciting thing he's ever seen. Dan tells Max softly that everything's okay, that Daddy's just playing a game. Max even hands Dan his bottle, playfully. Dan uses it to block another shot. The third biker moves to the passenger side. Dan slams the brakes and the bike shoots forward. Then Dan accelerates, ramming the bike from behind and sending the rider tumbling across the asphalt. Subscribe to the channel now because you won't believe what happens next. Just subscribe. The impact sound suddenly wakes Jessica, who asks what that was. Dan tells her it was just a pothole. Nothing to worry about. She falls back asleep. Dan drives through the night, his eyes scanning every car, every shadow, every possible threat. By dawn, exhaustion claws at him. His eyes burn, his neck aches. He finally closes his eyes for just a moment. When he opens them, they're half a mile from the college Nenah wants to attend. Nenah spots the campus sign and begs to stop. Jessica doesn't want to see Trevor. Nenah insists she wants to see the campus itself, not just her boyfriend. Jessica rolls her eyes, but Dan surprises everyone by agreeing. The campus buzzes with life. Students everywhere, festivals happening, music playing. He tells Jessica that if they want Nenah to listen to them, maybe they should start listening to her first. A college guy offers Jessica beer from a keg, calling her sexy. Then he realizes she's someone's mom and apologizes, embarrassed. Jessica remembers her athletic college days. She decides to show Nenah what she's made of and attempts a keg stand. She nails it. Even Nenah looks impressed, telling her mom that was actually awesome. Nenah actually wanted to visit the college because Trevor attends the college. Kyle mutters to Nenah that they don't like Trevor. He explains that ever since she started dating him, she became a completely different person. Trevor treats her like garbage, and she deserves better. During the campus tour, Dan admits he is impressed by her performance. She wonders what she'd have turned out to be if she hadn't abandoned her sports career. Jessica admits to Dan that she likes this spontaneous side of him. He jokes about whether he ever had sex on a pole vault mat back in college. Dan tells her not to answer that. She grins, saying she wasn't asking herself. Dan spots a German man on his phone, standing still, watching too carefully. He suspects the man is watching him. Dan approaches and starts a conversation, asking about the man's work. Jessica notices their interaction looks strange. Dan switches to German, speaking rapidly so Jessica can't understand. She doesn't give a thought about it. The German man confirms he's just a tourist, confused by Dan's questions. However, Dan realizes his mistake too late. A different man attacks from behind, tackling Dan into a chemistry lab just beyond the wall where his family tours. They crash through tables. Beakers shatter. Dan blocks a punch and counters with an elbow to the ribs. The fight is brutal but silent. Both men trained to kill without drawing attention. Dan kicks the attacker's ass and rejoins his family seconds later, like nothing happened. But Nenah is gone. She went to find Trevor. When Nenah discovers him sleeping another girl, her world crashes. She confronts him. Trevor tells her monogamy is just a construct of Western repressive civilization. He thought they were on the same page about that. Nenah returns to the van in tears. Dan tries to comfort her with a dad lecture, but stops himself. Instead, he teaches her a martial arts move, a 13th century technique that inflicts severe pain without permanent damage. Nenah asks how he even knows about that. Dan shrugs, saying maybe he's more of an interesting man than she thought. Nenah uses the move on Trevor, taking a picture of his twisted face as he crumples. She returns to the van with her head high, appreciating her father more than ever. Jessica asks what Dan said to her. Dan tells her it was just a dad lecture. On the road again, Nenah thanks Dan while driving. She tells him she's thinking about reclaiming her editor position. Dan supports her. He mentions her piece about corruption in the Board of Education gave him chills. Nenah's eyes go wide. She asks if he actually read that. Dan tells her of course he did. He's her biggest fan. She smiles. A real smile. Maybe the first one in months. That night at a small motel, Jessica and Dan finally reconnect. She points out it's not Thursday. She's falling in love with this version of Dan. The spontaneous one. The dangerous one. She suggests he was always like this before they met and changed because of her. Dan tells her he changed because he didn't like who he was back then. She kisses him, and for a moment, the danger feels worth it. But the danger is accelerating, and Dan is running out of time to tell the truth. Morning light cuts through the motel curtains like a blade. Dan slips outside and calls Augie from a payphone, his voice low and urgent. Augie confirms he's on his way to Las Vegas with the new identities, but he reminds Dan there's still one massive problem. The family doesn't know yet. Augie asks what Dan is waiting for. He points out that when his wife and kids have to change their names and flee the country, they might think something is wrong. Dan hangs up without answering. He sneaks back into the room and returns the phone he borrowed from the front desk. His hands shake slightly as he rehearses the words again in his head. Kyle finds him outside, sitting on the concrete steps. They finally talk about the streaming. Kyle explains it's something he's actually good at, like professional level good. It takes brains and reflexes. He mentions that the Air Force even recruits gamers now. Dan's face darkens. He admits maybe that's what he's afraid of. Kyle proposes a bet. Laser tag. First to 3 tags wins. If Kyle wins, he gets to start gaming again. If Dan wins, they play catch in the backyard for 6 months. Dan agrees. Who do you think wins when an assassin plays a game about killing? The laser tag arena glows with neon lights and artificial fog. This should be easy for Dan. He's hunted real targets in places far more dangerous than a suburban entertainment center. He gets the first tag, catching Kyle from behind. Then the second, anticipating Kyle's movement around a corner. Kyle asks how his dad is doing this. But Kyle learns fast. He mimics Dan's tactics, using the same angles, the same patience. Kyle lands 2 tags of his own. His movements become sharper, more calculated. Dan realizes his son inherited more than just his eyes. At least he doesn't need a DNA test. The final tag comes down to pure instinct. Dan spots Kyle's reflection in a mirrored panel and fires first. Kyle feels cheated, saying his dad conned him, but they're both smiling now as they grow closer. On the final stretch to Las Vegas, the family sings together again. Stories flow. Laughter fills the van. For these few hours, Dan almost forgets they're running for their lives. Las Vegas rises from the desert like a mirage made of glass and electricity. The strip glows even in daylight. They check into one of the top suites in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Marble everywhere. A mini bar bigger than their bathroom at home. Dan tells them he needs to run downstairs for a minute. He instructs them not to open the door for anyone. Subscribe before they walk into the trap. Downstairs, Augie waits in a parking garage. He hands Dan a manila envelope containing new passports, birth certificates, and one-way tickets to Vancouver. The price is hefty, but Dan doesn't argue. Augie tells Dan he's insane for waiting this long. He returns to the suite and changes into a suit. Jessica emerges in a dress that makes Dan prepares to tell Jessica the truth about his real identity tonight over a romantic dinner, while the kids babysit Max. He tells the kids not to leave under any circumstances. Don't open the door for anyone. Then they leave, unaware that McCaffrey's men already know their new location. The moment their parents are gone, Kyle suggests visiting the HyperX gaming arena. Nenah complains about going to a place full of Kyles, but she has no better options. The arena throbs with energy. Massive screens display gameplay. Professional gamers compete on stages like gladiators. Kyle meets another popular streamer named Ran. Ran admits he's watched Kyle's streams and offers to introduce him to Valkyrie and other legends. Ran notices Nenah, who is carrying Max, and asks if Max is her son. Nenah immediately recoils, saying absolutely not. She found Max over there and is just babysitting. Valkyrie invites Kyle to replace a missing teammate for the Counter-Strike finals. This is professional level, real competition. Rand tells Nenah that Valkyrie's team stands no chance. All her teammates get eliminated, and Kyle, like a boss, single-handedly wins the game. At a French restaurant, Dan and Jessica sit across from each other. Dan tries to start his confession 3 times. Each time the waiter interrupts with wine, with bread, with unnecessary descriptions of the menu. Dan snaps at the waiter in French, telling him to leave them alone. The waiter scurries away. Jessica stares at her husband, shocked. She asks when he learned French. Dan stumbles through an explanation, saying they teach Salesman just enough to sound fancy. Jessica leans forward, asking him to say something else in French. Lacking the courage to reveal the truth to her, Dan finally tells her the truth in French. He explains in rapid French that before he met her, he was a covert assassin, that he's been running from his past for 18 years, that the trip isn't spontaneous, it's survival. Jessica sighs, telling him she doesn't actually speak French, nor understands what he is saying. She says whatever he's saying sounds beautiful and sexy. Dan loses his courage. He switches back to English and tells her he loves her, that she's everything to him. She smiles, and he postpones the truth again. He's out of time, and he doesn't even know it yet. They gamble afterward. Dan pretends to focus on the cards. After a while, he tries calling the kids. No answer. They head back to the suite immediately. Back at the hotel suite, Dan opens the door and sees his kids sleeping in their beds, unaware it was just dummies set up to describe them. He exhales, tension draining from his shoulders. Jessica goes to freshen up in the bathroom. Suddenly, a dark silhouette appears behind her, but she is unaware. She lights candles, turns on soft music, and sprays love mist into the air. Dan smiles, starting to relax. Then he notices something. The love mist particles hang in the air, illuminated by thin red lines, laser sights. 3 of them, cutting through the mist like threads of death. Dan dives as bullets punch through the wall. He grabs a bottle of Flecha Azul tequila from the minibar and hurls it at the gunman's position. He shoots the bottle mid-air. It explodes in flames, igniting the curtains and one of the attackers. The man screams, rolling on the floor. Jessica runs out of the bathroom and straight into the arms of the third man. He presses a gun at her, holding her hostage. The man orders Dan to drop his weapon. Dan sets the gun down slowly. The man calls Dan by a different name, Sean. Jessica's face goes white. She whispers, asking who Sean is. The attacker smirks, saying he's going to kill Dan slowly. Then his associate at HyperX will kill Dan's kids. Dan moves. The knife flies across the room and embeds in the attacker's throat. The man drops, gurgling. Seeing this, Jessica vomits immediately. Dan tells her it's normal. Everyone barfs the first time. She runs toward the bedrooms, but finds only dummies arranged under blankets. The attacker's words echo in her mind. HyperX. His associate at HyperX. She knows where her children are. Jessica turns to Dan, her face twisted with rage and betrayal. She tells him to shut up. She doesn't want to hear his voice. She doesn't even want to look at him. She just wants to find her kids. She reminds him the kids don't have their phones because he threw them away. Dan's world collapses. Comment below, would you ever forgive him? At the gaming arena, Kyle finishes his match with 30 kills, the highest score of the tournament. The crowd roars his name. That's when Dan and Jessica burst through the entrance, sprinting toward the stage. He finally says the words out loud. Before he met their mother, he was a covert assassin. He escaped that life, and now they found him. Dan shouts that his former co-workers are trying to kill them. Kyle laughs, asking if he means people from Planet Car Deals. Dan's voice goes cold. He tells Kyle he's not kidding around. He suggests asking Max. The baby saw everything. Nenah stares at her father like he's a clown. Kyle tells him he's the biggest wimp on the planet. They don't believe him until they are shot. And now they believe. Dan grabs his family and pulls them behind a car. Dan draws his concealed pistol and returns fire. 3 shots. Kyle vomits on his shoes. Now Jessica tells him softly that it's okay. Everyone barfs the first time. After everywhere is settled, Dan tells them everything. His real name was Sean. He worked for a man named McCaffrey. He was responsible for 43 kills across 12 countries. Kyle's face goes red. He calls Dan a hypocrite, reminding him he banned gaming because of fake violence. Yet Dan killed real people. Nenah finally understands why her father never wanted to leave Buffalo, why he hated social media, why he was so protective. Dan pulls out the new passports and hands them to each family member. Nenah reads her new name aloud, Molly Anderson. She complains that at least it sounds like a real name. Kyle looks at his. Van Anderson. He says he's named after a vehicle. Jessica stares at hers. The name isn't hers. The face in the photo is, but everything else is a stranger. She tells Dan that after 18 years of lies, she's done. She'll take responsibility for the kids. There's a stranger named Sean Archibald Anderson here somewhere, but she doesn't know him. She calls Gwen, the woman from kickboxing class, the travel agent. Gwen answers immediately, her voice warm and concerned. Jessica asks for help getting out of Las Vegas with her children. Gwen tells her to sit tight. She'll handle everything. Dan begs Jessica not to leave. He warns her that McCaffrey will come after them whether Dan is there or not. Jessica looks at him with eyes full of broken glass. She tells him to make it safe then, to fix what he destroyed, and to stay away from her family. She takes the kids and walks out. Gwen arrived smiling. Jessica asks what she's doing here, that she wasn't expecting all this. Gwen explains she was on a layover nearby and thought she'd come get Jessica herself. On the jet, Gwen tells Jessica about her ex in Buffalo. They were together for years. Then he left her and married another woman. Gwen says she had to see what that woman had that she didn't. Jessica listens, sympathetic. Gwen explains that she did what she does best. She got close, won the woman's trust, then waited patiently for her to walk into the trap. Jessica's blood turns to ice. She realizes Gwen is talking about her. She tries to run, but McCaffrey steps out from the cockpit. His smile is thin and cruel. He tells Jessica she should have stayed with Sean. Quickly hit the subscribe button now. The final battle is coming. McCaffrey calls Dan from Jessica's phone. He shows Dan a video feed, Jessica tied to a chair, the kids huddled in a corner. McCaffrey gives Dan an address, an abandoned hotel on the edge of the city. Come alone, come unarmed. Dan arrives as the sun sets, painting the desert orange and red. McCaffrey greets Dan at the penthouse entrance, arms spread wide. He calls Dan his old friend and mentions he brought everyone for this reunion. Dan tells him he's flattered. McCaffrey asks for a hug. Dan refuses. Then McCaffrey reveals the truth. He's Dan's father. McCaffrey wanted Dan dead for abandoning him, for choosing a normal life over the family business. But watching Dan eliminate every man sent after him these past few days, McCaffrey felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. He makes Dan an offer. Come back, work for him again. In exchange, the family goes free. But there's one condition. No contact. Ever. McCaffrey can't have Dan going soft again. If Dan refuses, everyone dies. What would you choose? Your life or theirs? He agrees. McCaffrey orders his men to escort the family to the airport. The family enters the elevator. The doors start to close. Kyle childishly reaches out and presses every single button. The elevator stops on the next floor. Kyle tells his mother they can't abandon Dan, not after everything. Nenah agrees. For once, they're on the same side. Jessica hesitates, her hand hovering over the button that would take them to safety. Then she looks at the guard standing with them. She pulls Max's dirty diaper from the bag and shoves it into the guard's face. He gags, stumbling backward. Jessica kicks him out of the elevator. He falls 12 stories, his scream fading into silence. She looks at her kids and tells them they're getting their dad back. In the penthouse, McCaffrey leaves to make arrangements for Dan's return to the organization. Gwen stays behind, seducing Dan like a predator who's already won. The tech guy sits in the corner, monitoring security feeds, trying to be invisible. Gwen uses her softest voice, the one that seduced Dan years ago before Jessica existed. She tells him they were good together once. They could be again. She moves closer, her fingers trailing along his shoulder. The tech guy stares at his screens, pretending not to exist. Dan plays along, leaning into Gwen's touch. His hand finds the pressure point on her neck. 3 seconds later, she collapses into his arms, unconscious, but alive. He turns to the tech guy, whose hands shoot up in surrender. The tech guy is already there, working with Dan. Dan sees Jessica and the kids. He apologizes to Jessica for hiding the truth from her. He tells her he never had a clear chance to reveal it. He doesn't want her and the children to leave. McCaffrey suddenly has a feeling that something is not right. On the other hand, the tech guy knows Kyle and is a big fan. They are testing a drone to monitor McCaffrey. McCaffrey's men are mobilizing. They know something is wrong. Dan tells his family to get to the roof. He'll handle the rest. Kyle refuses to leave. He tells Dan he can help. Dan looks at his son, seeing himself at that age. He agrees. Kyle will be his eyes and ears. The tech guy produces a drone from the equipment case. Military grade, equipped with a camera and thermal imaging. Kyle spots 3 men moving up the east stairwell. He relays their positions to Dan. They shoot at Dan, but the bullets never hit him. He skillfully deals with them. McCaffrey watches from the penthouse security room, his expression shifting from anger to something else. He wakes Gwen. McCaffrey tells her to find the family, kill them all except Dan. He wants his son to feel what loss really means. But Dan asks his father to stop this madness. Subscribe before they're found. On the roof, Jessica hides the kids behind a ventilation unit. The door crashes open. Gwen steps out, backlit by the stairwell lights, a gun in each hand. She tells Jessica this is what happens when you take what belongs to someone else. Jessica fires first. The bullet ricochets off metal. Gwen laughs, asking if Jessica really thinks some kickboxing classes make her a fighter. She reminds Jessica that she does this for a living. They circle each other on the rooftop. Wind whips around them. Inside the hotel, Kyle tells Dan there are 9 guys left. Dan moves faster. He knocks each of them down and impresses McCaffrey. McCaffrey then shoots the drone. The drone explodes mid-air. In the fight between Gwen and Jessica, Gwen has the upper hand and teaches her a lesson. She lands under a huge pile of rock. McCaffrey confronts Dan in the main hallway. Just the 2 of them, no men, no weapons drawn. McCaffrey tells Dan that family made him weak, that loving people is a disease that infects assassins and makes them useless. On the roof, Gwen corners Nenah and Kyle. Max cries in Nenah's arms. Kyle steps in front of his sister, his fists raised like he knows what to do with them. Gwen finds this adorable. That's when the debris explodes. Jessica rises from the rubble, bleeding and furious. She grabs a piece of bamboo scaffolding, remembering her pole vaulting days. She runs toward the ventilation unit and plants the bamboo pole, launching herself into the air. She crashes back down, hard. Gwen laughs, asking if there are other events Jessica wants to embarrass herself with. Jessica stands again. This time, she doesn't try to vault. She throws the bamboo like a javelin. It flies straight and true, piercing Gwen and pinning her to the door. Gwen screams, dropping down. Alright guys, if you are here, please take just a second to hit the subscribe button and like the video. Just a sec guys. Come on, we grow by lifting others. They fight hand to hand, father against son, old training against desperation. McCaffrey is older but experienced. Every move is efficient, every strike calculated. Dan is younger but rusty. Years of selling cars instead of killing people slow him down. McCaffrey lands a crushing blow to Dan's ribs. Dan drops to one knee. McCaffrey picks up a gun. He aims at Dan, but Nenah steps into the hallway, her hands raised. She tells McCaffrey she's happy to finally meet her grandfather. McCaffrey keeps the gun trained on Dan, but his eyes flick to Nenah. She continues talking, saying she sees more than just a cold-blooded killer when she looks at him. She sees family. She sees someone who could choose differently. She asks if they could become a normal family. Dinners together. Holidays. Stories about the past without the violence. McCaffrey's expression doesn't change. He tells her if she thinks this little speech is going to win him over, she's mistaken. Nenah smiles. She admits she was just hoping it would buy enough time for this. Dan moves. He sweeps McCaffrey's legs, grabs the gun mid-fall, and pins his father to the floor. For a long moment, they stare at each other. Dan could pull the trigger. Make sure McCaffrey never threatens his family again. The family reunites on the roof as the sun rises over Las Vegas. They hold each other, bloody and exhausted and alive. Nenah's investigative article about McCaffrey's assassin network goes viral. Dan starts a private security company, teaching bodyguards and security personnel how to protect people instead of hurt them. Augie becomes his business partner, legitimate at last. Jessica coaches a women's kickboxing team. She teaches them that strength isn't about hitting hard, it's about standing up after being knocked down. Kyle continues streaming, but now his parents watch. Dan even appears on camera sometimes, giving tactical advice that makes the comments section explode. Killboy's viewer count doubles. The family prepares for the drive to Stanford. They pack an RV instead of flying, wanting the journey together. Before they leave, Dan collects everyone's phones. The kids groan, but they're smiling. Jessica asks if this is going to be their tradition now. If this story kept you watching until the end, you are destined for this. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more movie recaps that will blow your mind. Drop a comment telling me which moment shocked you the most, because this family story proves that the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun.